The gates of Fort Bragg opened before sunrise. A cold wind swept across the vast military training grounds, carrying dust, tension, and the distant echo of orders being shouted long before most recruits were even fully awake. The base never slept, but today felt different. Today was the beginning of a new intake cycle. New soldiers, new expectations, new failures waiting to happen. Among the arriving buses stood one figure who didn't draw attention at first glance. Private Emma Carter. Average height, lean build, hair tied tightly back, standard uniform, standard posture. To anyone watching casually, she looked like just another recruit trying to survive a system designed to break people down. But those who looked longer noticed something unusual. She wasn't scanning the environment like a nervous beginner. She wasn't fidgeting. She wasn't reacting to the chaos around her. She was observing everything like she already understood how it worked. The way instructors moved. The way senior soldiers positioned themselves. The rhythm of discipline in the air. Like she wasn't entering something new, but returning to something familiar. Arrival at the edge of pressure. Move it, formation in 10 seconds. The drill instructor's voice cracked through the yard like a whip. Recruits scrambled into rows. Boots hit the ground in uneven rhythm before slowly sinking under pressure. Emma took her place without hesitation. That alone made a few nearby recruits glance at her. Not because she stood out, but because she didn't. She blended in too well. Too controlled. A tall recruit beside her leaned slightly and muttered, "First time." Emma didn't look at him. Yes. Just one word. Calm, flat, no emotion. The recruit frowned. "You don't look like it." Before Emma could respond, a sharp voice cut through the formation. "Quiet." Everyone froze. A figure walked forward from the edge of the training field. Sergeant Cole Maddox. Even before he spoke, his presence commanded attention. He didn't need to shout to be feared. It followed him naturally. Decorated uniform, hard eyes, expression carved from years of battlefield experience and discipline that left no room for weakness. He stopped in front of the recruits and scanned them slowly, like he was looking at problems rather than people. "Welcome to training," he said coldly. "Some of you will quit, some of you will break. The rest of you, if you're lucky, will survive." No encouragement. No comfort. Only truth, delivered like a warning. His eyes moved across the line. And then paused. On Emma. Just for a second. Something subtle changed in his expression. Not recognition. Not concern. Something closer to evaluation. Like a soldier spotting a flaw in a formation. The first impression that went wrong. Training began immediately. Physical endurance drills, reaction tests, basic combat stances. Recruits struggled within minutes. Breathing became uneven. Movements became sloppy. The pressure was immediate and unforgiving. Emma, however, moved differently. Not faster. Not stronger. But cleaner. Every motion had purpose. No wasted energy. No unnecessary tension. She didn't outperform others in an obvious way. She simply didn't break like they did. That caught attention. And not the good kind. Sergeant Maddox watched from a distance as recruits stumbled through basic combat drills. He noticed patterns quickly. Who panicked under pressure. Who relied on strength instead of technique. Who would fail before the week ended. And then he noticed Emma again. She corrected her stance mid-drill without being told. Adjusted her footing after a strike simulation without hesitation. Recovered instantly after impact drills. Maddox narrowed his eyes slightly. "That one," he muttered under his breath. One of the assistant instructors beside him asked, "Carter." "She's thinking too much," Maddox said. "She's actually doing fine, though." Maddox didn't respond immediately. Then fine doesn't matter here. The moment everything shifted. Later that day, the recruits were gathered for close combat evaluation. A controlled sparring exercise. One-on-one. Basic rules. Controlled strikes, defensive movement, instructor oversight. Nothing dangerous. At least that was the theory. Emma stepped into the marked circle when her name was called. And then, Sergeant Maddox walked forward. That wasn't planned. Even the other instructors noticed. A junior officer leaned in. "Sir, you're taking this one." Maddox didn't look away from Emma. "She needs correction," he said simply. Emma stood still as he approached. No change in expression. No sign of concern. Just watching. Waiting. The air felt different now. Not training atmosphere. Judgment atmosphere. Maddox stopped 3 feet away. "Do you understand what happens when you fail here?" he asked. Emma replied instantly, "Yes, Sergeant." "Say it." "Failure gets you removed." "Wrong," Maddox said. "Failure gets you hurt. Out here, hesitation gets you buried." A silence followed. Then Maddox raised his hand and slapped her, hard enough to echo across the training field. Not accidental. Not instructional. Intentional. A shock test. A dominance check. A line crossed in front of everyone. Gasps erupted instantly. Several recruits stepped forward instinctively, then stopped themselves. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. Emma's head turned slightly from the impact. A red mark formed on her cheek. But she didn't step back. Didn't blink. Didn't react emotionally. She simply turned her head back forward and looked at him again. And that was when the atmosphere changed. Because she didn't look like someone who had been hit. She looked like someone who had just confirmed something. Maddox noticed it instantly. The lack of reaction wasn't fear suppression. It was control. He narrowed his eyes. "You still standing?" he said quietly. Emma answered calmly. "Yes." Something in his expression hardened. "Then let's see how long that lasts." The line that shouldn't be crossed. Maddox stepped forward again. This time, not for a demonstration. For a real engagement. The difference was subtle, but everyone felt it. Even the air felt heavier. He moved first. Vast. Precise. A trained strike aimed to overwhelm her guard immediately. But Emma shifted sideways at the exact moment of impact. Not late. Not early. Perfect timing. His fist missed. Maddox's eyes sharpened. She wasn't reacting. She was anticipating. He struck again. Faster. Emma blocked. Redirected. Used his momentum. A controlled counter hit landed on his shoulder, not damaging, but perfectly placed to disrupt balance. Maddox stepped back half a step. For the first time, he studied her seriously. The recruits watching were silent, because this was no longer training. This was something else unfolding in real time. And nobody knew who would stop it. The end of Part 1. Sergeant Maddox exhaled slowly, then rolled his shoulders. "Interesting," he said. Not impressed. Not angry. Interested. And that was worse. Because interest from a man like him meant one thing. The rules were about to change. He looked at Emma again, then raised his stance. "Let's continue," he said. And the entire training ground went silent, knowing that what came next would not look like training anymore. The training ground didn't feel like a training ground anymore. It felt like a courtroom where judgment had already begun, but no one knew who would be sentenced. Sergeant Cole Maddox stood in the center of the marked combat circle, shoulders squared, expression unreadable. The earlier slap still echoed in the minds of every recruit watching, not because it was physical, but because it broke an invisible rule. You didn't touch recruits like that. Not unless you wanted to send a message. And Maddox had sent one. Now everyone was waiting for Emma Carter's response. But she wasn't reacting the way anyone expected. She wasn't angry. She wasn't shaken. She wasn't even rushing to prove herself. She was just still, observing him, like he was the one being tested. The second exchange begins. "Guard up," Maddox said sharply. Emma raised her stance immediately. No hesitation. No adjustment delay. Clean posture. Balanced feet. Controlled breathing. A few instructors watching from the side exchanged glances. "She's too calm," one muttered. "That's not normal for a rookie." Maddox heard it but didn't respond. Instead, he moved. Vast. A forward strike meant a closed distance instantly. This time, it wasn't controlled. It was pressure. Emma stepped sideways. Barely. The fist passed her shoulder by inches. But Maddox followed immediately with a second strike, elbow rotation into a hook. Emma blocked it. But not conventionally. She didn't absorb the force. She redirected it, using his momentum against him. The movement was smooth, almost invisible. Maddox's expression shifted for the first time. Not shock. Recognition. He had seen that kind of defense before. Not in rookies. In trained operatives. The crowd starts to realize something is wrong. The recruits watching started whispering. "She just blocked that. No rookie moves like that. Is she special forces or something?" But no one had answers. Emma wasn't speaking. Maddox wasn't explaining. The tension kept building. Because now it wasn't about proving dominance anymore. It was about control. And Maddox didn't like losing it. Maddox escalates. Without warning, he closed distance again. This time faster. A combination sequence. Left strike, right arrow, right grab. Attempt, right arrow, knee feint, right arrow, body lock. Designed to overwhelm reflexes. But Emma adjusted instantly. She slipped under the grab, pivoted her body angle, and stepped inside his range. For a brief second, Maddox felt it. That moment of imbalance. Not physical. Strategic. Emma wasn't defending anymore. She was mapping him. Then, she struck. A controlled hit to his ribs. Not powerful. Precise. The kind of strike meant to disrupt breathing rhythm. Maddox exhaled sharply and stepped back half a step. The first visible reaction from him. The crowd reacted instantly. Gasps. Shock. Even disbelief. A recruit just landed a clean hit on Sergeant Maddox. The atmosphere breaks. Maddox slowly straightened. His eyes darkened slightly. "You're trained," he said quietly. Emma didn't answer. That silence irritated him more than anything. "I said, are you trained?" Emma finally spoke. "No, Sergeant." The answer should have been reassuring. But it was, because it didn't match what everyone just saw. Maddox tilted his head slightly, then nodded once. Something changed in his stance. Subtle, but dangerous. The instructor version of him was fading. Something else was coming forward. The shift into real combat energy. "This is no longer evaluation," Maddox said. The assistant instructors immediately looked uneasy. One stepped forward. "Sir, the drill parameters." Maddox didn't look at him. "Change them," he said simply. Silence. Then he turned back to Emma. "From this point," he said, "you don't score points, you survive contact." The recruits went still. Emma didn't move, but her eyes sharpened slightly. Not fear. Focus. Because now she understood something important. This was no longer training for him either. It was a challenge. A personal one. The first real clash. Maddox attacked again. No warm-up. No hesitation. A direct, heavy strike meant to end the exchange quickly. Emma barely shifted in time. The force passed close enough to disturb her balance. She stepped back. For the first time. Maddox noticed immediately. "You felt that one," he said. Emma didn't respond. He pressed forward again. Faster now. More aggressive. Left hook. Right pressure strike. Forward step. Emma blocked two, absorbed one and redirected another. But the pressure increased. Maddox was not holding back anymore. And that mattered. Because now the difference between them was becoming visible. Not skill. Not intelligence. Experience under pressure. Emma was holding. But she wasn't dominating. Not yet. The crack in the system. Maddox grabbed her arm during the next exchange. A tight control hold. A moment where most recruits would panic. Emma didn't. Instead, she rotated her wrist, shifted her weight, used his grip point as leverage, and broke free. Not violently. Efficiently. Maddox's eyes narrowed. That wasn't beginner technique. That was something refined. Something practiced. Something remembered. He took a half step back. Then said quietly, "Who trained you?" Emma paused. Just for a fraction of a second. Then answered, "No one, Sergeant." But this time, even she knew that didn't sound convincing anymore. The breaking point approaches. The recruits watching were no longer whispering. They were frozen. Because the dynamic had changed completely. This wasn't a drill. This wasn't discipline. This was two forces testing each other in real time. Maddox raised his fists again. But slower this time. Measured. He was studying her now. Not just attacking. Emma mirrored him. Perfectly. Like she was learning his rhythm faster than he could change it. That realization hit Maddox quietly. And for the first time, a small shift of uncertainty appeared in his expression. Not fear. Not doubt. But something close. Respect he didn't want to admit. The air over the training ground felt heavier now. Not because of heat. Not because of exhaustion. But because everyone present understood the same thing at the same time. This was no longer a training exercise. Sergeant Cole Maddox had crossed a line. And Private Emma Carter had crossed it with him, without even trying. The circle marked in the dirt no longer felt like a controlled sparring zone. It felt like a boundary between two forces that were no longer pretending. On one side stood experience hardened by war. On the other stood something unreadable, calm, precise, and unnervingly adaptable. Neither of them moved for a long moment. Then Maddox exhaled slowly. And everything changed. The drop of control. "Enough evaluation," Maddox said quietly. His voice was no longer instructional. It was final. He rolled his shoulders once. Then removed his gloves. That small gesture sent a ripple through the watching recruits. Even the junior instructors stiffened, because they understood what that meant. No more controlled strikes. No more safety margins. No more pretending this was routine training. One of the officers stepped forward. "Sergeant, this is a violation of." Maddox didn't look at him. "I said enough," he repeated. Silence fell instantly. He turned his attention back to Emma. And for the first time since the beginning, he stopped circling her like an instructor. Now he stood like an opponent. Emma adjusts without fear. Emma didn't step back, didn't react to the escalation. But something subtle changed in her posture. Her weight distribution shifted slightly. Her breathing slowed. Her focus sharpened. Not panic. Preparation. She had understood the shift before anyone else spoke. A few recruits whispered nervously. "She's still calm. How is she still calm?" But calm wasn't ignorance. It was awareness. And Maddox noticed it too. That was what made him more serious now. Not her strength. Not her counters. Her control under pressure. The first real strike. Maddox moved. No warning. No build-up. Just speed. A forward burst that closed distance instantly. The ground seemed to compress under his step. Emma reacted immediately, too late by a fraction but just enough. His fist passed close. The wind pressure alone shifted her balance slightly. But before she could recover, he followed. Elbow rotation. Then a body-level strike. Emma blocked partially, but the force pushed her back a half step. The first real displacement. The crowd reacted instantly. This time it wasn't gasps of surprise. It was silence with tension inside it. Because now they saw it clearly. Maddox wasn't holding back anymore. The difference becomes visible. The second exchange came immediately. Maddox closed distance again. Left strike. Right pressure feint. A sudden grab attempt. Emma slipped one attack. Blocked another. But the third connected lightly, enough to break her rhythm. She adjusted fast, but not fast enough to regain full control. Maddox saw it instantly. "You're reading," he said under his breath, "but you're still reacting." Emma didn't respond. But internally, she was recalibrating. Because he was right. He was accelerating faster than her adaptation window. Pressure builds. Maddox increased intensity again. Now it was no longer individual strikes. It was continuous pressure. Strike flow. Angle shifts. Distance control. Every movement forced Emma to defend instead of create openings. She blocked, redirected, moved, but she was being driven backward slowly. Step by step. The recruits watching started to murmur again. Is she losing? No, she's still standing. But she's backing up. That was the truth. Emma wasn't falling, but she was being pushed. And Maddox knew it. The psychological edge. "You're good," Maddox said suddenly mid-exchange. Emma didn't answer. "But you're not enough," he added. That was deliberate. Not instruction. Not evaluation. Pressure. Emma's eyes narrowed slightly. Because psychological disruption was part of combat. And Maddox was now using it intentionally. He attacked again. Harder. Closer. Emma blocked, but the force traveled through her stance more visibly this time. A small imbalance. Not enough to fall, but enough to notice. Maddox stepped in immediately and struck. Emma barely avoided a clean hit. The air between them felt electric. The crowd had gone completely silent now. Nobody was cheering. Nobody was whispering. Everyone was watching like something irreversible was happening. Emma stops retreating. Then, something shifted. Emma stopped stepping back. Just stopped. Maddox noticed immediately. A fraction of hesitation appeared in his next movement. And that was enough. Emma used that fraction. She stepped in instead of away. Not defensive. Not reactive. Forward. Her counter came fast, precise strike to his midsection, followed by a pivot that disrupted his stance. Maddox exhaled sharply and shifted back half a step. Not a defeat, but a disruption. And everyone saw it. The balance had not broken, but it had tilted again. Maddox sees it now. He paused, just for a moment, then looked at her differently. Not as a recruit, not as a trainee, but as a problem that refused to resolve easily. "You're adapting faster," he said quietly. Emma replied for the first time in a while. "So are you." That answer made something flicker in his expression. Respect. Reluctant. Unwanted. But real. The turning point begins. Maddox lowered his stance slightly. Not relaxed. Not exhausted. Focused. "Then stop reacting," he said. "Start surviving properly." Emma didn't respond, but her posture changed again. More grounded. More stable. Less reactive. The air tightened. Everyone felt it. Something was about to break. One way or another. Final exchange set up. Maddox stepped forward again. This time slower. Controlled. But heavier. Every movement carried intent. Emma mirrored him. Perfectly. For a brief moment. They stood at equal distance. Equal tension. Equal silence. Then Maddox spoke quietly. "Last phase." Emma didn't blink. And then, he moved. The training ground had gone completely silent. No shouting. No movement. Even the wind felt like it had slowed down. Every recruit, every instructor, every observer understood the same thing now. This was no longer a drill, a test, or a demonstration. It had become a clash of control. And control was something neither side fully had anymore. In the center of the circle stood Sergeant Cole Maddox and Private Emma Carter. Both still. Both focused. Both waiting for the next fraction of an opening. The distance between them felt smaller than it was. Not because they had moved, but because tension had compressed everything around them. The final phase begins. Maddox exhaled slowly. His posture changed. Subtle but unmistakable. This was no longer instructional combat. This was full commitment. No more holding back. No more evaluating. Just outcome. He stepped forward. Emma didn't retreat. For the first time, she stepped forward too. That single movement changed everything. A few recruits instinctively leaned in. One whispered, "She's going toward him." Another replied, "That's suicide." But Emma wasn't rushing. She wasn't panicking. She was choosing. And Maddox noticed that immediately. The clash breaks loose. Maddox struck first. Vast. Heavy. A direct engagement meant to end space immediately. Emma blocked, but the force pushed her arm slightly offline. Maddox followed instantly. Second strike. Then a rotation. Then a pressure step. The sequence came like a storm. Emma defended. Redirected. Shifted. But this time, she didn't give ground. Not even an inch. That detail mattered. Maddox felt it. She wasn't being pushed back anymore. She was holding and adapting the counter that changed everything. Maddox attempted a control grab, aimed to end the exchange physically. Emma slipped it, but instead of retreating, she stayed inside his range. Too close for comfort, too dangerous for hesitation. Her hand moved sharply. A precise counter hit disrupted his breathing rhythm briefly. Not a strike of power, a strike of timing. Maddox stepped back half a step. For the first time, he didn't immediately follow. The crowd reacted instantly. This was new. Silence before collapse. Maddox straightened slightly. He looked at Emma differently now. Not as a recruit. Not even as an opponent. As something that had forced him to adjust. "You're not standard issue," he said quietly. Emma didn't respond. But her breathing was steady. Controlled. Focused. Maddox nodded once. Then lowered his stance. "This ends now." The atmosphere changed instantly. Even the instructors stiffened. Because they understood. That wasn't a drill statement. That was a decision. The final exchange. Maddox moved. No hesitation. No build-up. Just full force. He closed distance instantly. Emma reacted, but this time instead of only defending. She met him halfway. The impact of their engagement echoed across the field. Strike. Block. Redirect. Counter. Step. Pivot. The exchange became faster. Cleaner. More dangerous. But something unexpected was happening. Maddox was no longer dominating the rhythm. Neither was Emma. They were matching it. Perfectly. Like two systems trying to overwrite each other. The critical opening. Then it happened. A fraction of imbalance. Maddox overextended slightly on a forward motion. Barely noticeable. To most, nothing. But Emma saw it. Instantly. She stepped in. Not fast. Not reckless. Perfect timing. Her movement disrupted his base position. Maddox attempted to recover. But she followed immediately. Second motion. Then a controlled leverage shift. Not brute force. Technique. Balance. Timing. Maddox's stance broke. Not dramatically. But enough. Enough for silence to explode across the entire field. The moment he realized it. For the first time. Sergeant Cole Maddox stumbled. Not falling. But losing structure. He recovered instantly. But it was already over. Because Emma didn't stop. She stepped back. Reset. And stood still. Ready. Maddox straightened slowly. And looked at her. The entire training ground was frozen. No one spoke. No one breathed. Because everyone saw it clearly now. The exchange had ended. And the result was undeniable. The slap that was never forgotten. Maddox didn't speak for several seconds. Then finally, he exhaled. "You didn't break," he said quietly. Emma replied just as calmly. "No, Sergeant." Another pause. Then he nodded. Slowly. "Once." "Neither did I," he said. Silence. But this time, it wasn't tension. It was understanding. Because both of them knew what had just happened. This wasn't about dominance anymore. It was about recognition. Aftermath across the field. The recruits remained frozen. Some didn't know how to react. Others didn't believe what they had seen. One whispered, "She actually held him." Another replied, No, she outread him. The instructors exchanged silent glances. No celebration. No correction. Just acknowledgement that something unusual had occurred. Emma stepped back fully into formation position. Calm again. Controlled again. Maddox walked a few steps away. Then stopped. He didn't look angry. He didn't look embarrassed. He looked thoughtful. Final words. Without turning fully around, Maddox said, "Carter." "Yes, Sergeant." A pause. Then, "From today, you don't learn basics anymore." Emma didn't react, but the air shifted, because everyone understood what that meant. She wasn't being punished. She wasn't being singled out. She was being elevated. Ending scene. The sun had risen fully now. The training ground was bright, but the atmosphere was still heavy with what had just happened. Emma stood still among the recruits again. But nothing about her felt the same anymore. Not to them. Not to Maddox. As he walked away, he spoke one last line, quiet enough that only nearby instructors heard it. "She doesn't belong in beginner training." Then, after a pause, "She belongs where pressure decides survival." And just like that, the day ended. But the story didn't, because everyone present knew one thing for certain. They had just watched the moment a recruit stop being a recruit.